false truth crusher will rise again. How long? Not long. Because no lie can live forever. How long? Not long. Because you shall reap what you sow. How long? How long? Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. If that scaffold sways the future, behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. How long? Not long. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. How long? Not long. Because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He's trampling out the bigots where the brakes of wrath are stored. He's loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is tempting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah.
From 1929 to 1968 is only 39 short years. Too short.
To gather the fruits of your labor. Too short.
To comfort fathers when your mother dies.
Too short. To ever enjoy grandchildren. Too short.
To no retirement.
39 years is just too short.
From 1929 to 1968 is only 39 short years, yet it's too long.
To be crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. It's too long.
To receive threatening phone calls, often at the rate of 40 per day. It's too long.
To live under the sweltering heat of continuous pressure. It's too long.
39 years is just too long.
From 1929 to 1968 is only 39 short years, yet it's long enough. It's long enough.
To be chased by police dogs and lashed by the rushing waters from fiery hoses. You are dramatizing the fact that justice has a way of eluding me and my brother. It's long enough.
To spend many days in jail while protesting the plight of others. It's long enough.
To know that it's better to go to war for justice than to live in peace with injustices. It's long enough.
To know that more appalling than bigotry and hatred are those who sit still and watch injustices each day in silence. It's long enough.
To realize that injustices aren't discriminating and people of all races and creeds experience this cruel captivity sooner or later. It's long enough.
To become a drum major for peace.
It's long enough. To visit the mountaintop. It's certainly long enough to have a dream.
Today we celebrate a life of 39 years. A life ended a year short of 4 decades, but a voice that continues to speak to a nation 4 decades later. We celebrate and honor a man, his voice, his dream, and his legacy.
How wonderful it would be if we could all live so well. Dr. King, like all others, would have welcomed longevity. Yet, when he weighed the facts, he said, "It's not how long a man lives, but how he uses the time allotted him." And so we salute and honor the memory of a man who lived in confusion of injustice for all his
Too short.
too long. Long enough, 39 years.
Martin Luther King Jr. would have been 89 today. We can only guess what he might have accomplished were he allowed to continue his work and had an assassin's bullet not killed him outside of his Memphis hotel room in 1968. Before his tragic death, though, Dr. King won the Nobel Peace Prize for helping to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, abolishing all forms of segregation and ensuring equal rights for all citizens in the United States. He also organized and led a Poor People's Campaign in an attempt to rid our nation of poverty and the problems associated with it. It is for these acts that we choose to honor his memory today.
Martin Luther King Jr. was never president. He was never a rock star. He was never rich. Dr. King was a father, he was a minister, he was a husband, he was a member of his community, and because of the strength of his belief in equality of all people, he became one of the most visible members of the civil rights movement of the 1950s.
So why him? What is it about Martin Luther King Jr. that makes him stand out, that has caused a national holiday in his name?
Martin Luther King was only one member of the civil rights movement, and were he here today, he would probably not want an entire day dedicated to his memory. Rather, he would want a day dedicated to the thousands of men, women, and children who made sacrifices, who gave up something for the hope of equality.
Near the end of his life, Dr. King started focusing on the power of serving others, saying, "Everybody can be great because anyone can serve. To serve, then, is to make one great."
Today we're going to learn about and celebrate the children of the civil rights movement, people just like us, who are growing up in a time of racism, inequality, and lots of closed doors. We are going to learn about how children helped change the laws of our country, how under the leadership of people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., it was largely children who got the rest of the country to pay attention.
And then we are going to take the lessons learned from the civil rights movement and apply them to our own community. What problems exist here in Olympia and around the world? How can we help to make our community and the world a better place? We will learn that we have great power, especially when we come together 450 strong.
But first, we must take a look back. What was happening to cause men and women to speak out in such large numbers, to be arrested, to lose their jobs, to risk everything? And as you think about what parts of our country were like in the 1950s, ask yourself, would you have done the same thing? What would cause you to join a march with the risk of going to jail, or being sprayed with fire hoses or attacked by police dogs?
It is now September 1957. Shows like I Love Lucy and American Bandstand are popular. Elvis Presley has just shocked the world with a new style of music called rock and roll. Cars are bigger than ever and a lot of people have left farms and cities to live in the suburbs. Work life has changed with more people now working at desk jobs and in stores than on farms and factories. Shopping has changed as supermarkets replace grocery stores. McDonald's pushes out old-fashioned diners, and Holiday Inns force downtown hotels to shut their doors. For many people, the American economy is booming and life is good.
But not for everyone. Despite these positive changes across America, one group is still treated differently, unequally. One group of people does not enjoy the wealth, nice homes, and large cars in the 1950s has brought so many. 100 years after slavery ended with the Emancipation Proclamation, Jim Crow laws that separated people based on the color of their skin were everywhere throughout the southern United States.
These laws kept black people and white people from being together. Black and white children could not go to school together. They could not play together. They could not eat at the same lunch counter in a restaurant or drink from the same water fountain. Blacks and whites had separate bathrooms and separate parks, and many restaurants and hotels did not allow black people to enter.
This blatant racism was actually the law, and most people followed it. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., born in 1929, became aware of this racism when he was 6 years old. At that time, his best friend was a white boy who lived on his street. They played together every day. When both boys turned 6, Martin was not allowed to go to the same school as his friend. Shortly after school started, his friend's father said he was not allowed to play with his friend anymore. Young Martin responded to this anger toward every white person. He remembers his mother telling him he must love the white men, but Martin recalled, "At 6, I could not understand how or why I should love such a race of people who hated me and who had been responsible for breaking me up with one of my best childhood friends."
Children all over this country had similar experiences, but in 1954, the Supreme Court ruled that operating separate schools for whites and blacks was illegal. That meant that kids, just like many of you, were responsible for integrating the school. Someone had to be first. Who would be the first black student to attend the all-white school?
In early September 1957, a 14-year-old student named Melba Patilla arrived at Arkansas's Little Rock Central High School, along with 8 other new students. They were the first 9 students to ever be admitted to Central High School. As Melba and her classmates approached Central High, they had to pass through an angry mob of white adults, outraged that the 9 students had been admitted to the school.
2, 4, 6, 8, we ain't gonna integrate. 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 The first time, the first day, I was able to enter Central High School. What I felt inside was stark raving fear.
Terrible, wrenching, awful fear.
A fear that I cannot explain to you.
There are no words for how I felt inside.
I had known no pain like that because I did not know what I had done wrong.
You see, when you're 14 years old,
Someone's going to hit you or hurt you.
You want to know what you did wrong.
although I knew the differences between black and white,
I didn't know the penalties one paid for being black at the time.
On the first day, the types of things I endured were
parents kicking,
Parents hitting.
parents throwing things.
you would get tripped,
People would just walk up to you and hit you in the face.
And you couldn't hit back. We had been instructed that any attempts to hit back
or respond to call a name.
Be the end of the case.
I had only been in the school a couple of hours.
And by this time, it was apparent that the mob was overrunning the school.
2, 4, 6, 8. President Dwight Eisenhower acted. Within days, he sent in the 101st Airborne Division to escort the 9 students to class and to restore order at Central High School. Though the Little Rock 9 were able to attend school with the help of the National Guard, the trouble was far from over. Melba Patilla writes about her experiences being taunted and teased throughout her time at Central High School in her book Warriors Don't Cry. She and her 8 friends were tripped, called horrible names, and taunted daily, but they stayed strong and they studied. And Melba Patilla and 6 of the other 8 students went on to graduate. If in a similar situation, what would you have done?
Millions of blacks could not vote, and African Americans could not receive service at a luncheonette, diner, or restaurant used by whites.
During this time, African Americans and Seminoles began nonviolent demonstrations in pursuit of equality. They boycotted segregated buses, went on freedom march to desegregate bus terminals, and sat in lunch counters. Although the targets of extreme abuse, the demonstrators refused to fight back.
Dr. King knew how to unite the people, but perhaps his most significant contribution was a strategy for nonviolent resistance. He taught the people to resist an evil system by acting through love rather than hate. He taught people to never fight back with violence, no matter how violent the perpetrator.
In 1963, using the strategy of nonviolent resistance, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a massive series of demonstrations in Birmingham, Alabama, known as the most segregated city in America. As in early campaigns, the civil rights demonstrators refused to use violence, while at the same time refusing to obey police orders and disperse.
Instead, the marches dealt, prayed, and sang freedom songs. A cappella groups sang about the civil rights struggle. Birmingham police arrested scores, then hundreds, and finally thousands of demonstrators who had been trained not to hit back, even if themselves attacked. The singing and praying continued, even in jail cells, packed to bursting with demonstrators.
The police eventually arrested Dr. King himself. A group of white Birmingham clergy published a letter calling on King and his followers to halt the demonstration and wait for a better time. In a letter smuggled out of Birmingham jail, King wrote back,
Perhaps you
Perhaps it's easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your brothers and sisters at will, when you have seen the vast majority of 20 million Negro brothers smothered in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to a public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her distort her personality by developing unconscious bitterness towards white people. When you find it necessary to sleep night and after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you, then you will find it difficult to wait.
Despite King's call to march, many adults could no longer afford to miss work, so Dr. King called upon the children.
Imagine your parents have been protesting for months, while all of us have been here at school. They're protesting for equal rights for us, but now they must return to work or risk losing everything. If you were asked to take their place, to sing and risk going to jail for equal rights, would you?
No In 1963, a century after the Emancipation Proclamation, the United States was still a nation divided. Segregation kept blacks and whites in separate worlds, which were anything but equal.
It would take the courage and sacrifice of the young and innocent to shock a nation that believed itself the bastion of democracy into truly making America a place with liberty and justice for all.
The time had come to say, no more.
No
In 1954, the ruling of the Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education declared that separate was inherently unequal and that integration ought to proceed with all deliberate speed. Not everyone agreed.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
In Birmingham, Alabama, desegregation was a dangerous business, no matter what the courts said. With more than 20 unsolved bombings between 1957 and 1963, and KKK associates in positions of power, Birmingham was a stronghold of racial oppression and intimidation. After his setback in Albany, Georgia, Martin Luther King arrived in Birmingham on April 3, 1963, for a make-or-break battle of the dying civil rights movement.
Project C got off to a disappointing start. A court injunction against parading and an 800% increase in bail costs made a trip to jail more likely to last 6 months than 6 days. Marchers realistically feared losing their jobs and their homes. Few volunteered. Fewer were arrested. On April 12th, King tried to draw people by marching himself. He and Ralph Abernathy went to jail. In King's absence, jive-talking James Bevel held the floor at the mass meetings and struck a chord with the young people who didn't have jobs or own homes. They began to volunteer in droves. Bevel started a whisper campaign for student demonstrations. When King was released on April 20th, he was highly conflicted over the use of children as marchers. Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, however, summed up the situation when he said, "We gotta use what we got."
Black parents tried to shield their children from the harsh reality of segregation, but it wasn't always possible.
March of 63, they put up the church next door the house. My father's car was lit on fire. He was also ran off the place one night. It was tough.
One of the worst nights of Chris McNair's life was when he had to tell his daughter the reason he couldn't buy her the sandwich she'd wanted at a store that day was that she was black. Still, they hoped. When Barbara Cross and her family moved to Birmingham in 1962, her father, Reverend John Cross, tried to get into a taxi.
And he said, "We don't carry your cash." My father told him before I leave Alabama to be carrying anyone who wants to get paid.
Civil rights photographer Charles Moore remembers his father saying, "Son, you don't treat people poorly because they are a different color." Other white children were not so lucky. Spoon-fed hatred and lies of black inferiority and prevented by segregation from befriending black children, many believed what they'd been taught. White student Charles Etchikin pointed out that people breathe in the prejudices of their culture without any understanding of what they're taking in. It takes something to wake them up. The children of Birmingham were about to wake up the entire nation. On May 2nd, DJ Shelley the Playboy announced, "Kids, there's going to be a party at the park." It was a signal. Black students of all ages climbed out classroom windows and over fences.
They call it D-Day for the demonstration day at 12 o'clock noon. I know we were all in school.
Some children walked as much as 18 miles to congregate at the 16th Street Baptist Church, site of mass meetings and nonviolent training for the movement. They would face the police they'd been taught to fear. At 1 p.m., James Bevel began sending them out in groups of 50 towards City Hall.
Who's the first one out of the church? We got about 4 or 5 blocks that was stopped by the police. Bull came up and they put those doors over in the car. And when they stopped us, the fear.
Bull Connor and the police were waiting and herded the children into paddy wagons and off to jail. After an hour, they had to commandeer school buses. 973 children were arrested. On their best day, the adult demonstrators had managed 32.
Went to jail 9 days, like the jail was horrible.
Cells meant for 50 now held as many as 300 children. Officers beat bodies back from the door with a chain in order to open it far enough to admit more prisoners. While D-Day had yielded many arrests, the events of the day were fairly non-violent. That would not be true of Double D-Day. Once again, students came by the thousands. This time, policemen were waiting with German shepherds and fire hoses. For an hour, students were quietly arrested. But Connor was running out of jail cells. He needed to scare them into stopping. Firemen doubled the water pressure to 100 pounds per square inch. Bull Connor gave the word to let him have it. The water literally blew children off their feet and swept them down the sidewalks. Witnessing this, black millionaire A.J. Gaston interrupted his phone conversation saying, "I can't talk. My people are out there fighting for their lives and my freedom. I have to help them."
Carolyn Mall and 2 other students took shelter against the wall of a nearby building. The water tore her sweater and ripped hair from her scalp. Charles Moore was there to capture the events on film. The water had scattered the students, but as the noise died down, a small group of students still standing could be heard singing, "Freedom." The students regrouped. Police dogs were set on the marchers and even some of the bystanders. Spectators, demonstrators, firemen, and policemen were sent to the hospital. 1,922 children were sent to jail, but the jail was full. They filled the jail yard and were taken to the fairgrounds and locked in the stock pens. Most would stay for 1 to 2 weeks. Wherever they were imprisoned, the songs of the movement rang out and gave them courage.
The effects of the Children's March came quickly, beginning on Miracle Sunday, when parents and children marched together. In spite of Connor's order, the firemen refused to attack. More than 20,000 students had skipped school to go to jail. By May 10th, the businesses of Birmingham had had enough and agreed to desegregate. As children returned to school, however, they were informed that they had been expelled. The school board's decision was appealed all the way to the district court in Atlanta before it was overturned and the students were readmitted.
On May 17th, Life magazine published an 11-page spread of Charles Moore's photos of the Children's March. More than half the country read it. In 186 cities across the country, people marched in support of the youth of Birmingham. In the White House, the photos sickened President Kennedy, who, bolstered by the courage of the children, at last called for change.
The events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased the cry for equality that I could ask the Congress of the United States to act for the proposition that race has no place in American life or law.
On July 23rd, Birmingham repealed its segregation ordinances, and in August, the March on Washington showed the movement was national. That fall, the schools of Birmingham were integrated, but after all these successes, the children would be asked to make one more sacrifice. On the morning of September 15, 1963, just as the Sunday school classes were ending and youth were preparing to usher on this special Youth Sunday, dynamite ripped through the 16th Street.
And gave me an assignment. I saw Annie to see you a little while. 15 minutes after I heard the blast, it was a horrible noise. The ground was shaking under us. Something hit me in my head, and I was screaming, and I heard all the kids screaming. Everybody running outside, crying, and looking for their loved ones.
5 girls in the basement women's restroom were buried under 30-inch thick pieces of the wall. 4 of them died.
My dad saw a gaping hole in the basement where the bricks were blown away, and when they started digging, and after about 2 or 3 feet, they found the girl's body blown together.
The nation was appalled. The need for change was painfully clear. There could be no more Birminghams. The tide of support for civil rights swelled, flowing into Washington and pushing the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed segregation. The next year, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 resecured rights that had been part of law, but not part of life for a century.
I'd like to say that my friend, 2019, that was a down payment of freedom. That was a down payment on history.
The courage and sacrifice of the children finally broke the back of the rule of fear and hatred.
Their innocent hope and bravery revived a dying civil rights movement and changed the future of their world.
They would be afraid no more.
Didn't mean that people are no longer racist. As many of us know, the racism struggle in our country continues, as it still continues in many ways today.
But for the victories that the civil rights movement did achieve, Dr. King was willing to die for the cause of freedom and justice everywhere. Today he is remembered as a hero. Near the end of his short life, King expanded his cause from speaking out not only against racism towards blacks, but also to speaking out against poverty and oppression towards all people.
He was concerned with the nation's poor, all of the poor, and how to wrench them out of poverty. And he involved himself in the protest against the war in Vietnam. In the last 3 years of his life, King didn't win any major legislative changes, but he had laid the groundwork for future change and for an expanded view of what justice looked like, as he not only fought for racial justice, but rather for social, economic, and racial justice. It was during one of these crusades in Memphis, Tennessee, that Dr. King delivered his last prophetic speech. It was as if he knew he would be killed the very next day.
I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
It was the end of his too short, too long, long enough 39 years.
How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? He has said, how many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? He has said, how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Yes, how many years can a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? He has said, how many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? He has said, how many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Yes, how many times must a man look up before he can see the sky? Yes, and how many ears must one man have before he can hear people cry? Yes, and how many deaths will it take till we know that too many people have died? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
And the voice of a generation. It is his voice we often hear when we learn about justice and the struggle for equal rights in our country. It is a genuine hope for a better future and a hope that is resonated in his voice that continues to ring in our ears.
But what would Dr. King say if he was with us today? What would he think of how far we have come? Would he say we continue to make strides against injustice? Would he say we continue making peace? What would he say about the Black Lives Matter movement? What would he say about electing my first African American president?
Though we have come far, we know we have not yet achieved Dr. King's complete dream. As long as we have racial inequality and strife, as long as we have people living in poverty, we still have work to do.
In the broadest sense, the civil rights movement and efforts made by all the activists within was about ending segregation and creating a community that values equal rights for all through nonviolent protesting movements.
Our purpose today is to learn about the civil rights movement, both so we don't repeat the horrors that many of our ancestors faced, and also that we can honor the men and women and children who sacrificed so much for our freedoms.
It is also recognized that the best way we can honor Dr. King, blessings to embrace his legacy, and continue the work that he started, is to serve others.
Before we talk about service, though, one of our very own students, Pablo Andres, would like to share his perspective on going through school in the United States after spending most of his life in Guatemala.
Latino por Pablo Alexander. Cuando llegué aquí en Estados Unidos, mi padre y mi abuela se pusieron muy felices. Mi papá me llevó a una tienda llamada Walmart y me consiguió los zapatos y la ropa y luego me llevó a un parque. Me siento más seguro en América donde no hay ladrones. En Guatemala las personas no se detienen en los semáforos ni hay cinturones de las sillas en los coches. Y en ocasiones los coches no tienen puertas. No es seguro para salir a jugar porque a veces la gente que conduce los coches son borrachos y que pueden chocar con nosotros. En Guatemala me gustaría jugar con mis primos. Ya a veces me dan $1, pero yo lo llamaría quetzal. En Guatemala pude comprender el idioma y me gustaría jugar al fútbol con mis amigos. Pero no me gusta la escuela. Allí había algunos niños malos que fumaban y nos golpearon. A veces ellos me patada en el estómago. Las personas que no respetan la tierra alrededor de Guatemala y tirar la basura hay por todos el suelo. Estaba muy sucio por todas partes excepto en las latas de refresco que la gente recogería para obtener dinero. Me encanta mi vida aquí en Estados Unidos. Me siento feliz y seguro. Si pudiera cambiar una cosa sería que pudiera hablar inglés porque mi padre y mi madre no saben inglés y quieren y estoy muy feliz de que yo vivo en Estados Unidos.
Is awesome. Story about Pablo just shared. Let's remember the real purpose behind Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday. The whole reason it was started in the first place was to encourage us, all of us, to get involved in serving others.
We are so excited today because for the second year in a row, we get to honor Dr. King's legacy by participating in our own day of service.
Through 28 different service projects, we will disciple in our community and we will serve.
On 9 different buses, as well as 3 projects happening on our campus, we will fan out across our community and we will serve.
We will help the homeless.
And the environment.
We will help feed those living in poverty.
And kids who can't cook for themselves.
We will help the children.
And turn our campus into a more beautiful place.
We will participate in community events at the Community Center and Chaos Public Radio Station.
And we will begin construction on a memorial garden for Miss Lamb.
Together, 395 students and 77.
I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream that one day this nation will be able to rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners would be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood.
I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, right there in Alabama, little black boys and little black girls will hold hands with little white boys and little white girls as sisters and brothers.
I have a dream today.
I have a dream that one day every valley will be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, every rough path will be made plain, and every crooked place will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
This is our hope. This is the faith that go back to the Southwood. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope.
With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood.
With this faith, we will be able to work together, pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with you and me.
My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring.
And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true.
So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire.
Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York.
Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania.
Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado.
Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California.
But not only that, let freedom ring from the Stone Mountain of Georgia.
Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee.
Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside, let freedom ring.
And when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and hamlet, every state and city, we will be able to speed up that day when all God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty, we are free at last!
Thank you guys so much for being such an amazing audience. And thanks to these performers on stage who did such a fabulous job today. You guys really brought it today. You did a great job honoring Dr. King and his memory. And I think if he were here today, he would be very proud. So thank you. This was such a great start to our morning today. We're going to continue to have a wonderful day. We are going to be a little bit late, but that's okay because nobody's like expecting us at an exact time. So we'll be okay. I'm going to give you a few announcements. Many of them are for teachers, so please listen carefully. Teachers, if you haven't collected your emergency backpack yet, if you're going off campus,